and we'll go. So my mind is still on last week's reading, and I thought of an idea that I shared with some other people in the synagogue, and they agreed that it was made a profound point and pointed out an important lesson. So I'm going to share it with you, and also has something to do with, and I'll make some other points about the readings and what it has to do with duties of the heart. Duties of the heart, we haven't done a lot inside the text, but we covered some points about the importance of the inner life of serving God. In other words, not being mechanical, but having feeling and having love and fear of Hashem, but also doing it for His sake, and loving those who are pious and who loving those who are His servants and so on. But doing the commandments for God's sake. One point that we can really see from what the author of the Duties of the Heart, is bringing out through his very long work, is that the way we think and the way we feel is really important. It's not just what we do, but the way we feel. So that brings me to the next point I wanted to make. Now, in last week's reading, Moses and God, God and Moses, they have a debate about whether Moses should be the messenger to redeem Israel, the children of Israel, from their exile in Egypt. And Moses doesn't want to go. Well, he says he isn't worthy of going. He says in different ways. He says that the children of Israel aren't going to listen to me, that I tongue-tied. I can't, I have an injury in my tongue. I can't really speak properly. God tells him there's nothing to worry about. I'm behind you, so I'll give you the power, the ability to do so. And and as far as them listening, don't have a negative attitude about them. They'll listen. There's a whole discussion about that, as you probably know. That's another point. But finally, Moses just says, listen, really, please give this to the one that you've given other such missions before. I don't think this is for me. And the whole thing is just like, it's baffling. It's baffling. First of all, Moses is, later on in Deuteronomy, we're going to say Moses is the man of God. Moses is my greatest servant and everything. And here he's hemming and hawing and this and that. Besides the fact that when God first called out to him, what did he say? He said, I am here, which connotes a willingness to take on whatever mission God wants of the person. The word hineni, I'm here, reflects I'm ready to do and obey. And yet he's debating. He doesn't want to do it, and it's just mind-boggling. What's happening over here? That he's debating with God about going, and again and again and again. Enough. And our sages say for 7 days he was debating about this. Finally, God says, okay, your brother Aaron will be your spokesman, and he's going to meet you. You'll meet him in the desert. He'll see you, and he will be glad in his heart to see you. So what's going on over here? So I have an approach that I want to share. So, the question also, one more question before I give that approach is that, why is Moses, if God, I don't understand this. To be a prophet, you have to have tremendous faith. In fact, in certain sources that I've read, the idea is before you get revelation, you have to already have done all your work. In other words, worked on yourself to such an extent that God's reality is completely clear to you, that you've done everything on your side that's possible to come to the highest levels of faith, and now you're ready to have an actual revelation. So how is it possible that Moses is actually saying, I don't think I can be the one? If God chose you, you're the one. What do you mean you're not the one? You don't think God knows what he's talking about? It's very bizarre. So here's my thought. For the redemption of the Jewish people to begin with discord, to begin with an insult, is not something Moses wanted to do. It's not, and not only that, Moses knew such a thing would in the end of the day be destructive for the Jewish people. And he refused to get involved with it. Even though God wanted him to go, he wouldn't go. And you can ask, well, but doesn't God know something will be successful? Yeah, but God is not in charge of the feelings of human beings, which is their own choice at the end of the day. Meaning the following. Aaron already had a history of being a prophet. It's brought in, Rashi brings it, that our sages say, based on verses in the prophets, which I don't, like I say, I apologize, but it's actually brought, I think, also, but even in last week's reading, or this week's reading, Rashi brings this. Oh, it's actually on that verse where it says, send the one that you sent. Aaron was the one who was previously sent. God already had sent Aaron as a prophet before in Egypt. God had bestowed prophecy on Aaron to rebuke the people about idolatry and other things. So he was already a prophet. He was already a spokesman of God. And Moses' point was this. How is my brother going to feel about this? He's the established, prophet. He's the leader. I'm not a leader. I'm basically an Egyptian who was kicked out of town. I mean, who am I? In the eyes of the people, I'm very small. The children of Israel don't know anything about me. And to them, I grew up in Pharaoh's house. And then I had to flee. And now I'm going to come back to Egypt. I'm the prophet. So how is that going to make my brother look? How is that going to make him feel? He's the leader. I'm the little guy. That's a painful, insulting thing. And Moses was afraid that even though Aaron was such a great person, but maybe he'd still feel some insult. Even if it's to a small extent, maybe he'd feel some demoralization. That instead of him, his brother, who was a nobody, so to speak, chas v'shalom to say that, but you understand what I mean? In other words, in terms of the public eye, Moses was an unknown. And suddenly, he's coming out of nowhere. And we all know that between brothers, there can actually be more jealousy than less jealousy, right? Because it's just the nature of a thing. It's the nature of being brothers. It's just like, it's a natural human tendency to feel, my brother has it, I should have, or I could have, and yet I don't. So that's painful because we're like equals. So if he has it and I don't, it's kind of almost like saying is that I could have, and yet I don't. And that feels painful. And there's maybe there's other theories of how to explain this psychologically, but the fact is that there's a tendency for there to be jealousy between brothers. And we saw that obviously in Genesis with the story of Joseph and his brothers. And so Moses didn't want a repeat of that, but he was saying to God, you may believe maybe you're right, I can be the one. Maybe so, but ultimately such a redemption will not succeed and it won't last because as a redemption that's ultimately based and that creates, that brings, that's based on insulting someone can't last. And I'm not interested in that type of redemption. It needs to be done in a way, to be a lasting redemption for the Jewish people, not like this. I didn't want to get involved in it, even though God kept telling him, you're the guy. He wouldn't do it. He didn't want to get involved in it. Until what? Until God said to him, okay, fine. Then in that case, Aaron will be the main spokesman, the public view, and you I'll speak to. Aaron is the one who actually becomes the visible spokesperson who actually speaks to Pharaoh. And in this week's reading, he explains to us that he would embellish it in parables or different things. So evidently Aaron was a very good speaker. And he knew how to speak to dignitaries. That's what Rashi brings this week. He says that the prophecy would be given to Moses, who would communicate it with Aaron, and Aaron would present parables and illustrations and explanations to Pharaoh. Wow. So that's all absent from the scripture, by the way. We don't see any of that. We just see the boom, boom, boom. God said this to Pharaoh. We don't see all this embellishment that Aaron evidently did. But the point is, if you think about it, Moses is saying something really, really important here. I mean, so he's always saying something important. But there's a deep message here, which is that if there would have been an appearance that Moses was usurping Aaron, that would have followed him through his entire leadership. He was a usurper, that he was somebody that ultimately overshadowed his older brother. And that would set a horrible example. The point is, it would have an appearance as if, he's putting his brother down. This is what he was worried about. So my point is that, in other words, our intentions and the appearance of ego in things is extremely harmful and can taint and poison even the best of things. And that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that here there was a concern that there would have been an appearance of Moses overshadowing his brother and being happy about it, and Moses and Aaron suffering because of it and being humiliated. And that was that image and for the people to see that, and for there being that to be an undercurrent or a topic of conversation or something that people would be aware of, that a younger brother overshadows his older brother and doesn't care about it, doesn't speak up for him, and doesn't involve him. This is something that Moses didn't want to tolerate. And I think he also, as I said, felt that with this type of breakdown in brotherly bonds that would result, no lasting redemption can come from such a thing. Only when God told him that Aaron feels absolutely no jealousy and he is not embittered at all, and he's not upset at all, and just the opposite, he's happy for you, then Moses is satisfied. And even then he's not satisfied until Aaron also is involved and becomes an equal partner. Once they're equal partners, then everything is good. So, I mean, it's interrelated to our pre-lecture discussion, in that the point is that Moses didn't want that, or you could say it this way, despite the best and most sanctified and holiest missions that you can have, he didn't want to do that and at the same time insult his brother. If that's the case, he didn't want to get involved. Even though he was saving the children of Israel, someone else can do it. You're right, you're a God, and you can give that power to someone else. If I do it, it's an insult to my brother, and I won't do that. So and this is what the Torah is telling us also about Moses. And I think that's why he ends up being the leader of the Jewish people. It's a fascinating, absolutely fascinating thing. It's not, the beginning of this week's reading, we find that God was a bit angry, upset with Moses, and he tells him that the patriarchs, they had faith in me even when I didn't fulfill my promises right away. But you immediately complain, why have you brought evil upon this people? Why have you brought ill upon them? But the truth is, I think conversely, I think actually this is Moses' greatest strength. I think his greatest strength is that even though on the one hand he has absolute faith in God, but on the other hand, he also can't tolerate seeing his brothers in pain. Similar with his brother. It's not that he wasn't ready to do what God wanted him to do. As I said, his immediate reaction in last week's reading was, I'm ready to go and I'm ready to do. But when he found out that he would be replacing Aaron, then he couldn't do it. And this, I think, is why he became the leader. Because God was looking for someone, not just someone who'd be a robot and just listen to everything God said, although we do see so many times that God praises Moses and Aaron for doing exactly as they were commanded. Yet at the same time, there seems to be this other element of advocating that when it comes to the children of Israel, when it comes to the Jewish people, when it comes to harming his brother, then he will argue, he'll debate even God about that. And that seems to be, I think, Moses' most unique quality. So if I'm right about that, you also have to understand in that case, that means that that's a quality needed to be a teacher of Israel, because Moses ultimately becomes the paradigm teacher. So that's something we have to understand. That's maybe for another day. But I guess the point is that a teacher of Israel is, well, basically he stands, as Moses says in Deuteronomy later, as I stood between you and God. So to be in between is to be in between. On the one hand, he's the ultimate servant, but on the other hand, he's the ultimate advocate. So he's both. And I think that God loves him most for that. And that's really why he's picked, is that he's willing to even debate God for his brother and for his people. And that's something I think extremely unique that we find. So even though we see Abraham debated God also, even about Sodom. So it's not a new quality maybe, but I think you could certainly say Abraham was a lot more respectful, right? I mean, eventually when God said no, he accepted, okay, no. And finally when God said no, there's not even 10, there's not even none. All right, he said fine, and he was done. That was that. But no, Moses won't give up. He keeps telling God, no, 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 7 days. You know, imagine standing there for 7 days, God's trying to convince him. I mean, it just blows my mind. I mean, I don't know how you can say, I mean, how can you say no to God? But he did it. Fascinating. And yet he's still Moses. And yet God continues to be intimate with him. So clearly this isn't just silliness. I mean, this isn't just a person who's small. This is something very big. And I think that's the point here, is that this is this like very important dichotomy. There's this very important, you have to juxtapose, you have to balance two things at the same time. On the one hand, you have to have faith in God even in the worst situations. On the other hand, you have to be unable to tolerate your fellow's suffering. Even though your own suffering you have faith in God about, but someone else's suffering you can't stand, and you have to advocate on their behalf. And that's what Moses had. So that's that point. um
Rabbi, I have a question.
okay, sure, please.
So Aaron was the public face because Moshe didn't want to usurp that position. But at some point, Moshe did step into that role.
Right.
Do you know a specific time when his speech impediment was healed, or when he became the person who stood up and spoke instead of Aaron?
I mean, we don't really see it until after they leave Egypt. And even then, I mean, again, traditionally, the Torah was taught. So I think what it is the people actually heard Moses' voice on Mount Sinai. I think that's really the first time that they really hear Moses. I mean, what happened at the Reed Sea, it could be that was an instruction they got from Moses. But in terms of his oration, I think Mount Sinai was really the big moment in which his voice was heard from the mountain. All the people heard him. So in other words, the first commandment was given directly by God, and the rest of the 9, or maybe 8, because the first 2 may have been one, said together by God. But the rest of them was said by Moses, and all the people miraculously heard that. But after that point, the Torah was taught according to tradition, the Torah was taught in a certain type of a, there was an order and a ritual, how do I say it? There was a hierarchy, meaning God spoke to Moses in prophecy, and then Moses spoke to Aaron and his sons, who spoke to the sages, the elders, who spoke to the rest of the people. So again, the people weren't addressed directly by Moses. Moses instead spoke to Aaron and his sons first, before speaking to everyone else. So there was still, again, this element of respect for Aaron, I think, that was there. So in other words, what I'm saying is, no, even from the beginning, God insisted that the prophecy go through Moses, but that speaking part go through Aaron. Again, you have to understand why, why was this the case? God insisted on Moses being the man. That's what we know. Moses represents Torah, and Aaron represents what? The priesthood. And as God told Moses, when what merit were the people going to leave Egypt? The merit of receiving the Torah. So ultimately, it was the merit and power, so to speak, the spiritual reality that Moses represented that was taking the people out, not as much Aaron. I don't know if you can understand what I'm saying there, but Moses represents Torah, and Torah is saving the people, basically. The people are leaving they are being redeemed in order to receive the Torah. So he's the man. He's the receiver of the Torah. That's what Moses is. Moses is chachma, wisdom. That's what his spiritual existence, is defined by. So, yeah, but at the same time, in this week, we say that Moses and Aaron are one, and they're interchangeable. Sometimes one's name is referred first, sometimes the other name is referred first. The Rebbe has a nice explanation about that. It's similar to what I've already said, is that Moses represents Torah study and maybe also the commandments, while Aaron represents the priesthood, who represents prayer in our days. We don't have sacrifices, but represents prayer. So the idea of these names being, ordered differently means there are times in life we have to begin with studying Torah that prepares us to pray properly, and sometimes we need to pray in order to study properly, or in order to do the commandments properly. So they're interchangeable. They're both have their place and their time, which precedes the other. It's a very interesting, obviously a very practical application of how to understand the names shifting and being moved in terms of which precedes which. There's another point like that I would like to make, maybe a Hasidic type of, reading of the discussion about what we read at the beginning of this parsha, the end of last week's reading, is that God did not give the land of Israel to the patriarchs. The land of Israel was given to Moses. What does that mean on a deeper level? So I was thinking that the land of Israel, it's the earth, it's a land, it's something physical. It represents the body. And maybe it represents physicality, and obviously working the land of Israel means refining and prevailing over the body to do God's will, to refining it to bring the body over on our side, so to speak, and the patriarchs represented, famously Kabbalistically, Abraham represents loving kindness. Isaac represents fear and discipline. Jacob represents mercy, splendor, and so basically they represent different emotion, what we call emotive attributes. They represent different modes of feeling, holy feeling towards God, right? And so the idea, you could say, means that these feelings alone, they're not enough to overcome the body. They are very powerful, but at the end of the day, that's not enough. We need what only not even Moses, but after Moses' time, after what? After Torah is studied, then the people can enter the land. So that's interesting because you may be able to. So what does this seem to be telling us? That a person should work on their character first. A person has to have fear of God and piety, and they have to study the Torah, and then they can attempt to then overcome some of their hang-ups and so on that they have, that represented by dealing with and battling the land. I mean, basically what it says in Hasidic works is that the 7 nations represent bad character traits. They represent 7 bad traits. So that's the idea, that after the patriarchs couldn't do it alone, and after Moses, actually, if not for some mistakes, Moses, during the time of the receipt of the Torah, that would have been enough. In other words, if the Torah would have been studied properly and the commandments fulfilled properly, without the failures and the mistakes they made, they would have entered the land with Moses. That means that, in other words, with fear and love of God and with compassion, if you infuse the patriarchs' qualities and you infuse them into Torah study and fulfillment of the commandments, then we can get to the level of going into the land of Israel, meaning overcoming the bad character traits of the body. So, you with me on this? Comments? Questions? Okay, let's see. So again, I just want to come back to that point, is the importance of the ideas. In Judaism of the heart, there's this concept of serving God for his own sake, and also being honest with other people and caring about their welfare in an honest way. It's so important, like in our society also. There's kind of an undercurrent of hypocrisy. For example, products that they're trying to sell you, or on television or whatever, in the media, on your computer. Is it really for your good, or are they just trying to make, or is this only a profit? What do they call it? Profit motive. And they're telling us this is good for you, this is something good for you, enjoyable for you. But is it, or is that what they really care about, or is it just profit motive? And it soaks into so many different areas of our life, and even in areas, for example, you go to a therapist. Somebody, you're letting your heart out to this person, but they're on salary. And once the 45 minutes is up, it's time for you to go home. That's it. Don't call me. I don't make house calls. So I think in our society, we suffer from this point a little bit, this kind of lack of like an open, of sometimes feeling a real caring between people and a real devotion to an altruism that's really real, not for my own purposes, not because I want to have a good time, or I want to prove something, or because of my career. It's very important. It's not like a side thing that, like, the main thing is you just do good and your intentions don't count. They really do count a lot. I think they count a lot to people. Like, they count a lot to us. When someone does something to us and their intention is not good, or even the opposite, we can sense that. When someone's doing something and they really don't mean it, they don't want it, or just the opposite, they're even maybe saying something nice but in a sarcastic manner, obviously then it has no value anymore, does it? And then it's like, you don't want it, because their intention is shown that they have contempt for us, and then we're not interested anymore. So you see the importance of the feeling of intention and why we're doing what you're doing, why that's so important, and to try to get there, and how to get there, and how to and basically, and this is also very important in Chabad Hasidus thinking also, the idea of bittul, the idea of trying to get some selflessness into our lives, and not to do something because of us. And that means even spiritually, not to be thinking just, well, this is where I want to go in my spiritual journey, this is what I want to accomplish, this is what I want to write on my belt, but to put ourselves aside and think of others, or think of what God wants from us. What does God want? Not what my vision. It's kind of like you're at that interview and they ask you, okay, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And maybe, the answer is, well, where do you need me to be in 5 years? I mean, in other words, if you were having this conversation with God, and he asked you the question, so it's not like you want to see yourself in 5 years, but what do I need to accomplish? What do you want me to be doing in 5 years? Over the next 5 years, what do you want? What do you need me to do? It's not about me, but what needs to be done, and again, I think it's a little old-fashioned. It's a little old-fashioned, meaning to say the idea of duty and responsibility. It's not like what I need for me to get somewhere, but what does the world need from me? And so I think it's something people used to understand a little bit more. Like we're talking about in terms of God, but it could be even in terms of family. It could be even in terms, of whether it's children or whether it's, you know, certainly the ideas of that about our country, about a country or community is really been very, very strongly weakened in people, that they have those type of duties and responsibilities, and those things matter. And I'm not going to get into the merits of that or not, but it's just the point is that the way of looking at life as I have certain duties and responsibilities, that it's not about where I need to go to feel good about myself, but it's something it's a calling that I must answer. And I think also what's interesting about what people don't realize is actually that may be an exit away from a lot of depression, because maybe the real answer is that as long as we're maybe within ourselves, we'll never be happy, because we're always deficient. A human being is never complete. Maybe the only way we will feel complete is being part of a greater whole. So obviously when a person's mission is, doing the will of God, well, I mean, you're to be connected to the infinite, to be connected to the one and only. I mean, to say perfect is like an understatement. To connect to the Holy One, blessed be He, then that, and there's no deficiencies anymore there. All right. What else can we say? There's a lot more to be said, obviously. Okay. There's also, it's interesting actually, and from the other side of this, the other side of the coin is something that we're learning in Tehillim and Psalms, which is this idea that we touched on last week, which is that King David tells us that Torah study and fulfilling the commandments, but primarily Torah study itself, is something that gives him great delight, and that Torah study and following the commandments to him is greater than all riches. Right? That was in chapter 119, verse 15. And then in verse 16, it says, I will delight in your statutes. I will not forget your word. So it's like, on the one hand, we're saying that a person should be selfless, thinking of the mission. At the same time, there seems to be this deep fulfillment, this deep pleasure in fulfilling the commandments at the same time. Because on the one hand, say, I will speak of your precepts. So he's recognizing this as his connection with God, and it's in order to cleave to God, it's in order to do God's will, right? He's seeing it not as just like studying Torah in order to get smart and impressive and be a scholar, God forbid, but he's saying it's your precepts. See, there's this awareness to King David, to the psalmist, that this is God's precepts, your statutes. So there's selflessness, but at the same time, there's a deep self-expression, there's this deep pleasure at the same time. So in other words, it's becoming part of the person, where his values and these are like it's part of him. He's happy as like he's home, and this is like his favorite thing. I mean, it's also called God's delight, which is fascinating. Okay. It seems to be something that is inherent in the Torah and Torah study itself. I don't know if there's a way to, sometimes it's kind of like, why does food taste good to you? I mean, it's just a thing. I mean, can I explain why we like ice cream or why we like a nice ripe cherry? It tastes really good. It's sweet. I mean, it's like taste is something very hard to explain or reason. It's like a fact. It's just is, right? And I think similarly, if we compare, how can we compare? But at the same time, Torah is similarly like you have to. They often say that Tamur Kitar Hashem. They say taste and you'll see that God is good. This is actually also a verse in Psalms elsewhere. But the point is, you got to taste it. You got to study it. And when you study it, you'll also get a sweet feeling from it. You'll have a pleasantness. You'll also get a pleasantness from it. But you have to study it. It's something you got to experience. It's not something that we can just tell you. But I think also it's from a Jewish perspective, I think part of it is it's a deeply self-expressive, endeavor. It's a deeply the being involved in Torah is like an expression of yourself, and that might be also explanation like why the Meinel should study their laws, because that's your thing, and that's where your pleasure, and that's where that's where it's going to come from. So all the laws are related to you. That's yours. Okay, any questions so far? Any comments on anything? Okay. Oh, we're running out of time. So if you look at verse 19, well, I wanted to quickly mention verse 18 also. Unveil my eyes that I may behold wonders from your Torah. So this is the element of Aaron before Moses, meaning praying in order to receive the gift of understanding the Torah. But the commentaries say that this is, Hasidic commentaries among others, say that this is referring to the secrets of the Torah. Because the word wonders in the Hebrew is more like, it's not exactly, the translation is not really wonders. It's how would I say that? It's mysteries. It's more like something hidden, something distant, something that you can't understand. So this is referring to the secrets of the Torah, the mystical and hidden parts of it that God, that David is praying that God revealed to him, and he should understand them. Verse 19 in chapter 119, I am a sojourner on earth. Do not hide your commandments from me. So the idea of a sojourner and a stranger is someone that doesn't really feel fully at home in materialism. Someone who's a sojourner, goes from place to place, he's in a tent maybe, stays at a youth hostel, particularly in those days. Someone who was traveling, they didn't have 5-star hotels. He was basically, maybe lucky he stayed in an inn. Often they may have to stay on the road. So he was roughing it out on earth. And it's similar to our sages' statements, and this is the path of the way of Torah. Person eats their bread soaked with water and salt, and sleeps on the earth. This is the way for it to succeed in Torah study. In other words, to neglect and abandon, or to at least not to require many physical conveniences, but to forego them in order to study Torah. Because let's face it, Torah students don't get paid too much. It's not a multi-six-figure income. Okay, it's something that it's a dedication that you do, and often in a situation of poverty, as many people, particularly in the land of Israel, are doing, studying kollel or something in yeshiva. You're living in a very simple life. And so I think that might be part of the point here that King David is saying. I'm a sojourner here. I'm not concerned with my needs here, and therefore, please do not hide your commandments from me. So that might be an approach. Any questions? Any thoughts? All right. We'll do some review. Hopefully, Rod will post a class. Titles for this class. Maybe Brotherly Love Before Redemption. And how to get to the promised land, in terms of the second point I made. Okay, everyone, have a good evening. I'm glad I stuck it out and made it through.
Thank you,
I'm
Rabbi.
glad you did
Very
too.
welcome.
Glad
Rabbi, what you
Yeah.
were saying, really, we need that more and more in light of everything that's happening in this world right now. To have compassion on people, to really care about others, even though they may not agree with us, or they may be totally
Yeah.
opposite of us.
Yeah,
But thank you. I really
You're
appreciate what you said.
you're welcome, everyone. Good night. Good night now.
Good night.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.